But thank you very much for that kind introduction. And what I'm going to talk about today is around male victims of domestic abuse, some of the uh, statistics, also some of the challenges they face and their experiences, and also some information on how best to support them. So I'm just going to share my slides. Let's fingers crossed, everyone. Hopefully they're all working. I can't see anyone, so I'm presuming they are, unless somebody jumps in and says they're not. So yeah, there's thumbs up. Thank you very much. So welcome everybody. So as Anna said, I'm Mark Brooks. I'm the chair of the Mankind Initiative charity, and just in terms of what we actually do, I'm just going to check these work. Brilliant. We're a charity that's been running for nearly 25 years now. We're based in Taunton, but we're a national charity, and we were the first one, the first British charity to support male victims and their families. And also importantly, we're set up and run by women and men. We run a number of things. We have direct services, so we've got a very popular helpline, national website with lots of information and a directory of services. Importantly, all of our work is trauma informed, and I think one of the things that we've developed in the last couple of years is a survivors recovery program, and that's for male survivors who have been out of a relationship for a couple of years but want some extra peer-to-peer support, which is obviously managed, and we run that for we run that for the armed forces and 2 police forces as well. And then we've got other things like national service standards, obviously your presentations, training. So we've got longer training sessions. All of our team are qualified, including myself. So I'm a domestic abuse services manager in terms of qualification. We run a number of other things. So please do go on our website, have a look around, subscribe to our newsletter. Without any further ado, just context about what I'm going to talk about. So there are more female victims than male victims. We wouldn't and need more services for men, but not in terms of giving those services that women have and of using them to fund male services. We obviously want more funding for everybody. And also it's not competition between the genders. And so it's, you know, we're trying to get away from conversation about women or men. It's women and men. And what that does is gives me an opportunity now, a kind of framework just to talk about male victims. But it means that anything I say doesn't take away from the experiences that women go through. And also the slides and everything will be available afterwards, and there'll be links as well to a number of videos which colleagues can look at in your own time. So just go back to some basics. We had the Domestic Abuse Act under the previous government, came into force in April 2021, so it's 3 years old now. And just to broadly go through what domestic abuse is, it's between individuals aged 16 or over, and they have to be personally connected. And that broadly is that they're either partners, ex-partners, or adult family members. And obviously the law, like all laws, apply to everybody equally, so it's regardless of your gender or sexuality. One of the key changes, and all of us in the domestic abuse sector wanted this, and the government delivered, basically children now are secondary victims of domestic abuse, and so they're officially recognised in law now, in terms of that if they see, hear, or experience the effects of the abuse and are family members, for example, carrying out the abuse, then they're now considered victims of domestic abuse, and that's a real change that wasn't in place. And I have to say, the legislation in the UK is far stronger and far more overarching than any other domestic abuse legislation in the world. Just in terms of what the types are, these are all the official types. So these are all hard coded into the law. So physical sexual abuse, violence, threatening violence, controlling, coercive behavior, controlling, gaining, basically where somebody's completely subsumed by the other. They lose their sense of identity, coercion, living in fear, being threatened, being harmed, for example. Economic abuse is really important, not having access to finances, for example, being controlled through work, and also psychological, emotional, and other types of abuse. So again, these are hard-coded words in the legislation. Just on coercive and controlling behaviour, again, these are the official wording, and it means, as I said, controlling behaviour. Somebody's completely dependent. Doesn't have to be physical violence, which I'll come on to, but it shows that basically that somebody's behaviour is regulated and they're isolated from friends and family and others. And coercive behaviour, is around harm, punishment, frighten, and fear. Also, forced marriage and so-called honour-based violence and abuse come under a lot of these definitions as well. So the overall picture. So these are all government statistics. So they're not statistics that we as a charity have produced. And I've used female statistics not because it's a competition, but just for context. So roughly speaking, 1 in 6 to 7 men will be a victim of domestic abuse in their lifetime. That's around 750,000 men a year, according to the Office for National Statistics. About 2/3 of those from a partner or ex-partner, the other third from a family member. Around 18 men die every year at the hands of a partner or ex-partner. And also, interestingly, that if you're in a gay relationship, and that applies for men and women, you are more likely to be a victim of domestic abuse than if you're in a heterosexual relationship. And also, I mentioned other issues around forced marriage. So 1 in 5 victims of forced marriage are men, 1 in 3 victims of stalking are male, which is becoming more and more to the fore, stalking as a whole, and the trauma that has on victims, both female and male. And also issues around, you see, certain equal levels of economic abuse. But also, one, and I'll dwell on this a little later, is that around 6.5% of men who are victims of partner abuse, that it's from a partner or ex-partner, have actually had suicide ideation or tried to kill themselves. It's more than figures for women, but it shows again the link, the trauma of partner abuse with regard to men and women obviously thinking about taking their own life. And you can see these figures here. This is why it's useful to send these slides out afterwards. But again, these are from the Office for National Statistics based on surveys they do with both women and men. And you can see in terms of victims of partner abuse, the levels of physical injury higher for men than women. In terms of going from minor bruising, scratching up to more significant injuries. But also you can see the mental and emotional effects, which are often so invisible to everybody, about the problems, the men and women not wanting to have relationships with anybody else, and also, as I mentioned, a number of percentage of men who have attempted to kill themselves, take their own lives. So you can see how the trauma of domestic abuse is actually playing out with regard to all victims. Just some more statistics. I don't overload too much, but again, this is how men seek help. And I've been doing a lot of work on policy, public policy around suicide prevention, helped on the suicide prevention strategy, the government, also around men's health policy more widely. And as part of my everyday work is not just in domestic abuse, but also around men's health, communication campaigns to support men to access public health activities and support, but also around suicide prevention. And one of the things that we're seeing is that there's been an improvement in terms of now we've got 80% of male victims have said that they've actually told somebody they're a victim. But what's interesting is that far fewer or fewer of those male victims would actually tell a counsellor or therapist compared to women. There's obviously far too few women getting help or seeing a counsellor or therapist. And also in terms of a health professional, a third as many men will seek help from a health professional, which tend to be a GP, for example, or A&E or some other service, is far fewer for men than women. These kind of definitions are from the ONS, so health professional is very wide, but that's their definition. But we are starting to see more and more men tell the police. Around 1 in 4 victims of domestic and partner abuse will actually tell the police. But what we're still seeing is very few certain men actually being supported by a local domestic abuse service. And one of the important points, and I'll come on to later, is that every local authority has a duty to run a domestic abuse service. And that domestic abuse service, their main domestic abuse service, must support men as well as women. And I'll do a lot of talks where it's assumed that the local council service only actually supports women, and that's not true. And it can't be true because the Equality Act means that a local council can't have a service for women and not have a service for men, because that comes under sex discrimination. So the Equality Act 2010 is a really important piece of legislation. I'll come back to the help seeking, and what's interesting in our helpline, it's anonymous. So we don't take people's phone numbers, we don't ask for their name, where they live, and any of that details. Obviously, some may venture it as part of the conversation, but we never ask or record it. And what we've found is that 3 in 5 of the men who call us have never spoken to anyone before. So again, the importance of anonymity, especially at first disclosure for men, can never be understated. And that's why helplines like Samaritans and others are really important. That really works for men who call us, especially because 2/3 of those men, maybe different men, have said that they would not have called our helpline if it was not anonymous. So the fact that it's anonymous, men are calling us for validation. They're finding out wanting some basic information, and they're also wanting signposting to those local services or to the police. And also we get lots of other people calling our helpline. So we get lots of mums, we get lots of sisters, we get lots of daughters, brothers, male mates, work colleagues calling us, often without trying to find out if somebody they know is a victim. Just things on our helpline. I was looking at this the other day. So the average court age on our helpline is 42. We do get men. We had 7 men last year who were actually over 75. The men and women, the younger a man or a woman is, the more likely they are to be a victim of domestic or partner abuse. But generally speaking, for men, it's easier to leave when you're younger because you're not married, you haven't got kids, you haven't got a mortgage. So, but the average age that call us is 42. Average time they've suffered is 6 years before they've called us. And nearly all of those men who have called us have gone through the psychological and emotional control. Practically all the men. And then you can see the coercive control that I mentioned, and around 2/3 have gone through physical abuse as well. So you can see how that's playing out. It's important to recognise that men are victims in all kind of shapes, sizes, and forms. So disabled men, men who are in older age brackets, men who are from an ethnic minority, for example, but also LGBT plus men as well, and certainly some of the work we've done with other organisations. There's particular barriers and challenges that men same-sex relationships face, especially if they've not disclosed that they're gay to friends and family, so they're being controlled because of their identity. Also, in gay relationships, it's more difficult to have long-term partnerships, and therefore some men stay in an abusive relationship, a gay relationship, for longer because they fear that they won't be able to have a relationship with another long-term partner. And that's research from a chap called Stephen Maxwell at the University of Glasgow, which was that was very much part of the research findings that he had. And then there's obviously issues around threats to spousal visas, ostracization from family and friends, and other issues. So there's some particular barriers around gay men. In terms of, I'm just going to touch on some of the barriers. So, the kind of this model, especially the centre, the power and control, is very much the standard domestic abuse model, where you've got one individual who's got control and power over another individual. But there's a couple, and that circle gets worse and worse as time goes on. But there's three or four particular issues and barriers that really impact on men, and they're in a kind of light blue. So masculinity, societal belief systems, policy, and lack of visible services. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to touch on some of those particular barriers, not all of them, but certainly on masculinity and societal belief systems. So on masculinity, so wherever you sit on the fence, whether you think the way men are and the way they behave is down to nature versus nurture, and obviously that debate's endless. But wherever you sit on that kind of fence, men represented by society, but also how they're socialized into being resilient, independent, strong, stoical, have a significant provider protector role. And these really kind of govern how men feel and think and do, and also how society thinks that men should be. And these act as a real internalized barrier. And, certainly, even though we're moving away from really harmful terms like toxic masculinity and, if only men would speak more, and harmful terms like that, we're moving away from those, but still the kind of socialization of men still has a real impact. So how does that play out if you're a male victim? So first of all, men don't recognize they're a victim in the first place. So in terms of a victim of domestic abuse, so they recognize the abuse, they recognize the harm it's causing them, but they don't put two and two together and think, the light bulb doesn't go off and think, that's domestic abuse. Because domestic abuse is quite a technical term. Not so much for men and women, perhaps in their younger than 35, for example, because of relationship education, and it's more in a kind of common lexicon now. But certainly for older men, they don't recognise the term domestic abuse, and what they're going through is domestic abuse. And for men, they feel this real enhanced sense of shame and embarrassment, the lack of pride, because it rubs against all of those stereotypes and archetypes about what it means to be a man. How can I be a man and be a victim of domestic abuse? Especially, for example, if they're 6'2", and their female partner's 5'6", etc. They think, how can I be a victim? What's that going to look like to the outside world? So size and height difference. Men generally, so obviously a generalization, are bigger than women. So in a heterosexual relationship, those kind of size and height differences can play a role as well. So they feel isolated. Men don't want to draw attention to problems because they're worried about what other people think, try and cope on their own. They have this enhanced sense of not being strong. They worry about what else is people going to think. And there was some interesting research from the Domestic Abuse Commissioner a couple of years ago, where she asked men and women what sort of support they needed when they were a victim. So I was talking to survivors. And for women, they said, they wanted to leave, keep them and their children safe. That was the most popular answer. For men, the most popular answer was what support I could have got to help my perpetrator. So in that scenario, men, and it's not a fashionable word, but men felt a real sense of chivalry in terms of that, even though they were the victims, they wanted their partner to get the help before they got the help. And that was a real clear difference in the way different between men and women and how they kind of framed the support they actually needed. Here's an example, Metro, for example. I've got lots of examples, but this one always rings true. Chap here, he was embarrassed. He didn't want to speak to anybody, didn't want to explain what was going on. And also, he didn't even think that men were victims of domestic abuse. Eventually, he did report it, and he was encouraged by friends and family. But, clearly here is a situation where all of those issues I spoke about really played out. Richard Spencer, this case happened 18 months ago, but there was a big documentary, and I'll put some links into it later, on Channel 5 a few months ago. And basically, him and his ex-wife, 7-bedroom house outside York, Jaguar. They had a Jag. Very successful careers. He had a successful IT career. She was in a successful career in the probation service. Got 2 children. He was a victim, worst case of controlling behaviour the judge had ever seen. He basically lost all independence, wasn't allowed to sleep, had horrific abuse. And again, the only reason he actually left that relationship was because he sent some film footage he had on a nanny cam to his an old friend of his, and said, would you think of this? Don't tell anybody. I wonder what your view is. And the first thing which he did was call the police, and rightly so. And she went to prison. But have a watch of that documentary. The other area I'm just going to touch upon is about societal belief systems. So I've talked about what men feel internally, but also how does society play a role in how men are supported and also how men are recognised. So for some men, they're not always believed, or they've really got to work hard to convince friends and family, police, work colleagues that they are actually a victim, because it's like, well, you're a man. How could you be a victim of domestic abuse? Some men are told that they don't really need the support, that they should man up. Or there's a presumption that men don't need any help. There's been research recently with local magistrates, and where there were blind scenarios, and the magistrates basically were blind tested. They had a scenario. So half of them was for men, half of them for women, but it was the same scenario, and the genders were flipped. And basically, the magistrates said, when they were doing scores on risk and harm, the physical and psychological risk on women was scored far higher than for men, even though the scenarios were exactly the same. Also, an area I talk about quite a lot, a lot more research, and I see this in a lot of homicide reviews, around a lack of personal and professional curiosity. What I mean by that is lack of spidey sense, especially from friends and family and others, not recognising that a man that they know is a victim of domestic abuse, because their spidey sense is not attuned to thinking a man could be a victim. So suddenly, one of their friends, family members they haven't seen for a year, he's got a new girlfriend, boyfriend, for example. They think, oh, well, he's just loved up. That's why he hasn't been in touch. Where certainly speaking to others, people's spidey sense is far more attuned if it was a woman in those types of scenarios. And I mean, one charity was set up, and it was and one of the reasons it was set up for men was because they had one of their mates stop going to Everton Football Club, stop seeing friends and family, and eventually killed by his partner. And they hadn't seen him for 3 years, and they thought this was highly unusual, but the Spidey says it wasn't quite there to think, well, actually, is this an abusive relationship? And the same with professional curiosity. We see time and again men going to, albeit it's reducing, going to GP surgeries, police, and others, and they're going with injuries or work. They're being late, suffering from depression and anxiety, and nobody's asking, well, what's going on at home? Are you in a good place in terms of your relationship? And as I said, one of the things, we're moving lots further and further away from damaging phrases like toxic masculinity. It's your responsibility as a man to leave. But also we see a lot with perpetrators, reverse psychology, the kind of domestic abuse, DARVO, domestic abuse reverse victim offender. You're a man, who's going to believe you? If you tell the police, I'm going to be the one who report you. If you leave, you'll never see your kids again. And so we see perpetrators, primarily females in this area, using kind of psychology and the narratives to actually keep men in abusive relationships. This all plays on the minds of men because they fear not being believed or taken seriously. And you can see how, again, some of this plays out. Popular culture, merchandise. You can still get a t-shirt, a husband beater t-shirt. You can get a blow-up kickboxing kit, suggesting where you might want to aim any of your kicks. A knife block, and even a vegan cake in Newcastle. Now, the reason I highlight these things is not just because obviously they're terrible, but you wouldn't be able to get merchandise like this if you reverse the genders, but somehow this seems to be quite acceptable in the other way around. I won't play any of these. I've got one video I'm going to try and play at the end, but again, I've got examples of how this plays out. Video we did over 10 years ago. We're trying to get funding to redo it and test it again, where you've got a male victim and you've got a female victim and a male perpetrator in London, locked off cameras. They're actors. The man starts harming the woman. Everyone jumps in. An hour later, they do the same thing, but they flip the genders. So it's the woman attacking the man, and people are laughing. That's one awards, that video. It's very sweary though, so don't play it if there's any kids around. Sky News a few years ago. Again, they were laughing about a man who'd been stabbed, and it was about supposedly it was over food, stabbed by his partner, and they all thought this was funny. This actually re-traumatized a number of men. So I had a number of men ring me up in tears because they'd seen this on Sky News and they'd been through this. And they're seeing their experience trivialized on mainstream TV. So this actually re-traumatized some men. And Friends, obviously, sadly, the chap's not with us anymore, but certainly there was this Joey had a abusive girlfriend who was about, I mean, literally must have been about 5 foot. So we're obviously doing it for effect, and she was harming him physically, and all of his friends were laughing, thinking it was funny. So you see that being played out in popular culture. Just briefly on some of the male experiences. So there is, not only have we got the best legislation in the world, we've also got the best academics when it comes to male victims. Number of academics: Nicola Graham Cavan, Ben Hine, Elizabeth Bates is first class. These are world leading academics. Produce some really, really good research directly with male victims, and you can see the kind of impact on men from from that evidence about the physical abuse, and women will tend to use implements rather than their bare fists, for example, because again, women tend to be smaller, so they will have to use an implement to harm a man physically, rather than if it's the other way around, a man will tend to use, their bare fists, or because they can, because they're bigger, but women will tend to use implements rather than actually direct harm. But obviously, this man here was going through both. Sleep deprivation, psychological abuse, you can see here. This chap was not being allowed to sleep. Also, last one about friends being cut off from friends and family, logging onto emails. And a case I heard about a year ago was a chap, his girlfriend had access to his mobile, and one day she changed every number in the contact list by one particular number. So obviously it wasn't noticeable. So when he started trying to contact friends and family, the numbers weren't going through, and she was saying, well, that's because they don't want to speak to you. Well, they obviously hate you. They've blocked you. It's clear that they realize that you know that basically they don't want you to contact. And he obviously had no idea because she had subtly only changed one particular number. That's whilst men are in the relationships. We've got post-separation abuse. Also, so that's when the relationship's finished. Children is particularly used as a tool in this, traumatizing men and often the children as well, in terms of child contact. Obviously, abuse through family courts in terms of racking up legal fees, not complying with child arrangement orders. Anxiety effects, you can see here, stalking as well, a particular issue post separation, and also just post-traumatic stress disorder. I mentioned our recovery program. This quote I always sticks out. There was a chap, he's in a new relationship, so life's moving forward. But basically, he used to say that he felt safer doing a tour of Afghanistan than actually being with his ex-wife. So, a tour of Afghanistan rather than being with his ex-wife. I mentioned the local magistrates. As I said, this kind of like research I said about high risk and harm, and you can see there in terms of male perpetrator, female victim, high levels of risk and harm, but when it's the other way around, female perpetrator and male victim, significantly less scores of harm and risk, even though the situation was exactly the same. So you can see how that plays out. Just lastly, I'm just going to dwell on just public policy. There's a lot of debate at the moment. We've got a new government as well. But the last 15 years, male victims of domestic abuse, but also sexual abuse and forced marriage and a range of other crimes have been designated by a previous government as being victims of violence against women and girls. They've been part of women and girls strategies. And of course, those men and boys who are victims of all of those crimes aren't women and girls. And certainly there's been some recent research again about re-traumatizing. Men have felt re-traumatized when they've discovered or recognized that actually, as a male victim of historical sex abuse, they're actually described by the government as being a victim of violence against a woman, when clearly they're not a woman, they're a man. And there's a lot of policy work and campaigning about keeping the violence against women and girls strategy, because that's obviously very much needed, but having a parallel or a different strategy for men. Some tips, some things to think about. First of all, about your culture. It's really important that men are believed when they disclose on this or anything else. 5-second test. If men don't feel that you believe in them, either orally or verbally, then they will just shut down and they won't tell you, but also they'll worry about telling anybody else, and that can be extremely damaging. This whole issue I mentioned about being professionally and personally curious, really important. Ask and inquire. Don't make judgments. Think about the injuries or depression and anxiety. What really is the cause of that? Is it a relationship? Is it a family member? Overcome any cognitive bias, especially around societal confirmation of bias. Well, men aren't victims, they can't be victims, these kind of unconscious bias. Expectation bias, well, men aren't coming forward, so that just confirms what I already knew, that they didn't exist. Ostrich bias, which is one I always use against finance directors, as we all do. Basically, we don't really want to think about male victims because that's going to cost us as an organisation more money. And also, don't place the emphasis on men's changing. A lot of work that's been done around men's health. I'm very much part of that. It's about bringing services closer and making society easier, society helping men, and services being more male positive, bringing themselves closer to men rather than just trying to say, well, men don't talk, it's the men's fault. Practice. Same standards apply for men as they do for women. So if you use DASH risk assessments or other types of risk assessments, there's a number around. The police use a slightly different one. They apply to men as well as women. I mentioned before about service awareness. Local services support men. So don't think, oh, I need to signpost a man to a service, but I don't know where they are. The same ones that support women support men, the main ones. Equivalent pathways for men, safeguarding policies I mentioned, also legal aspects. All legal issues apply to men as well as women. We've got the RSI, which has been a scheme rolling out for GP surgeries and specialist domestic abuse service. About a third of the RSI programs catered for men, but there's lots of brilliant research happening right now around a specific program for male victims, which is great. Yeah, if you have general domestic abuse training, make sure it's inclusive. It doesn't say, oh, men can be victims, and then for the next 3 hours you just hear about female victims. And also there's a range of service standards, and also there's practitioners network. The whole issue about confidentiality is really important for men at first disclosure. So it's, some, that reassurance around that. And also interestingly, and it's different in some different sectors, but men aren't worried about the gender of the person helping them if they're a victim of domestic abuse. They're not worried if they're being helped by a woman or a man. They just want to be helped and validated, and so don't need to worry about that particular issue. It's obviously different for women, but for men, they're not worried. And so there's kind of a number of things there to think about. And also there's some challenges. More men are coming forward, but not as many as there are victims. So there's still some challenges there, but we have seen some great progress. We've got 200 services now available for men, those local services. We're starting to see more campaigns and more activities, improved literature and websites, and importantly, more and more men coming forward to services, but nowhere near enough. And the last point about tips, it's just really about communications. If you check, it may not be relevant to everyone, but think about the environment, how you communicate to men. If you've got a website and you're looking at domestic abuse, have you got pictures of men? Do you use the word man and men? It's really, really important. If you use the generic words victims, men won't think it's for them. You have to use what I call the gender nouns. So you have to use female or male or man or woman, because men will just think it's for women. And also, as ever, think about when men go, not where you think they go. So putting information up on on libraries and others won't work, but obviously use social Facebook groups. barbers, gaming communities, wherever, sports clubs, wherever men go is really important. So there's some tips there. So I'm just going to click on something there. Right. I'm going to try and play this video. Hopefully I've got enough time. I'm going to play the video right at the end, but here's the link to the videos here, so you can have a look at this in your own time. Some other TV programs. This was an hour-long documentary about a young lad who was a victim of domestic abuse in Bedfordshire. Got 2 kids. His ex-partner went to prison. Again, if you want to look at the trauma, not only what happened, but also the trauma and how long-lasting, this is a really good case study. Same, I mentioned Richard Spencer. This just over an hour, came out in March. I think it had 2.5 million views within the first few weeks. So again, watch that, the trauma and everything. And just my conclusion, take a gender-informed approach. Try and free yourself from any stereotypes. Think about professional curiosity, awareness campaigns, and making sure your support is very clear that it is available for male victims. So lots have happened, but there's a lot more to be done. Tools and videos, all links there to all of that, what I've talked about. And also, if you want any information about our recovery program, training, any of our wider courses, please do get in contact as well. So hopefully that was all good. I'm going to actually stop the sharing. Please someone shout if I'm going over time. And I'm now going to try and get this work. Anna and I did test it, so let's see whether it will work. Okay.
She just came up behind and stabbed me in my left arm, and that cut all the way through my arm and came out the other side. And then I had 2 more further stab wounds on my back. Blood was going everywhere.
In the evening, after any argument, always as I was about to fall asleep, she would bring up the whole argument up again. I soon learnt to just apologise for anything and everything, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be allowed to get any sleep.
I opened my diary and she'd placed a letter in it stating that she was pregnant and had come off the pill deliberately. I felt totally violated.
In the evening after any argument, always as I was about to fall asleep, she would bring up the whole argument again. I soon learnt to just apologise for anything and everything, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be allowed to get any sleep.
She kept telling me that she would kill our children and me if I ever left her, or if I did not comply with whatever it was that she wanted.
I mean, the first time, I've got a perfect sort of slow motion video memory of it. I was sort of just sitting on the sofa. It was about 6 o'clock at night. The TV was on, but I wasn't watching it. I was just sitting there with a drink. And she just came in and punched very hard on the nose, and I bled, and then she went back into the kitchen again.
I mean, I suppose that the worst examples of physical abuse are the things like, I was driving the car when the eldest 2 were quite young, and we got into an argument and she just kept punching me in the head while I was driving the car. I couldn't do anything because I had to keep driving the car. So I'm just getting punched in the head. I have 2 children in the back. You know what, if she punches me unconscious or something, and I'm bleeding after all this...
There'll be slapping, scratching, pushing, pulling, blocking your exits from a room, spitting, sometimes kicking, throwing things. The whole time was like walking on eggshells, because you didn't know which version of her was going to come through the door after work or whatever. You didn't know if it was going to be the nice one or the not so nice one.
I was raised to never, ever, ever hit a woman, so I never fought back. I just covered my face and backed away from her the best I could.
I'd have to bring proof of purchase for milk when she would send me to the shops, and ring her when I was in the shops to prove that I was there and only there. I wasn't allowed to take my daughter to school because of all the single mothers there.
She once injured her hand. She punched me in the face too hard and she broke her pinky finger. And we went to the doctor's office immediately, and the doctor called it a boxer's break. Then the doctor offered for her to press charges against me. And she made sure that I knew about that when we got back into the car. She said that the doctor has gave her his card, and that any time that she wants, all she has to do is call this doctor, and the doctor will help her press charges against me for assault. And I said, but you hit me in the face and broke your hand on my face. And she said, it doesn't matter. And she used that as a threat all the time. She said, all I have to do is call the doctor. She also used to say that all she has to do is put a bruise on her body and just bang herself against the door jamb or something, and she just has to say that I did that.
The relationship's over for 2 years now. I still don't feel like I could trust another person to form a new one. I'm heartbroken knowing there's nothing I can do to help my son. I'm still in court fighting.
She totally manipulated the relationships I had with my own family, trying to avoid contact with them or not seeing them, and feeding me negative comments about them all the time. It's so obvious now with hindsight what she was doing. But it was gradual, you see. Like the frog warmed up gently in the pan. You don't see the abuse of the relationship creeping up and taking over you.
I tried to kill myself. I ate all the sleeping pills I could find, drank a bit, and was happy that it was over. I woke up next to her. It was the worst moment in my life. I was still in hell.
The worst example was a night when she doused the bed in paraffin, set fire to it with me asleep, turned the power off, and waited by the switch with a hammer.
I've never attacked her or fought back at all. I've tried to restrain her at times to prevent her from attacking me. The problem in that is that she would then show me the bruises a couple of days later and tell me that she could report me to the police for assault and that they would believe her story. Unfortunately, that is true. It eventually got to the point where I would just cover my face and not even try to restrain her.
She also subjected me to several ordeals of sexual torture. She stole a pair of handcuffs from the prison where she worked. And the first I knew about it was waking up to find myself handcuffed to the metal bed frame. She proceeded to torture me, and then got infuriated because I was not getting an erection, obviously too terrified and in too much pain, and gave me a good punching and left me there.
I have no friends now. My wife insisted I stop socialising as I was now with her. And if I loved her, I would not want to spend time with anybody else.
Thank you. And just in terms of the background to that, I mentioned Liz Bates's research. So that is the direct testimony of male victims of domestic abuse. The voices are lecturers and students at a university, but the actual words that they say are actually the real life quotes from the research from Liz's research. But as I said, you can hear directly in terms of the type of things that men have gone through. So without any further ado, I'll hand it all back and I'm happy to answer any questions. I hope that was useful.
I think beyond useful. I think I'm a little bit speechless. It was poignant, harrowing, but needed. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Mark, to talk about this stuff. Before we go any further, people have asked for further links and other organisations that are available around Great Britain and Ireland as well. So I gathered early today, I gathered them together thinking that this might come up. So I'm just going to leave this on the screen for a bit so people can see the different ones available. The numbers, the national helplines available for each country are above the numbers. So DSAhelpline.org is Northern Ireland, SDA FMH is Scotland, and so on. If I've missed any, I do apologise. And of course, right at the bottom as well is Samaritan's number. So if anyone is struggling with anything that has been spoken, if you've been affected, if you're struggling with anything that's been spoken about tonight, please do consider reaching out to any of these below, or indeed mankind themselves. Even if you go to somewhere that might not be pertinent to your country, they'll direct you to the right place. And right at the bottom, of course, is Samaritans, who have the suicide number helpline as well. So please, just going to leave this up so people have time to find it, basically to write it down if needed, and hopefully we'll have some questions in as well. Yes, and thank you, Mark, for popping your email into and I hope no one can see my chat and Q&A up, and I'm not covering what's going on there as well. So brilliant. Okay. So moving on from that is apparently the end, and it's not at all. So let me just quickly pop back to the Q&A box. Here we go, Q&A box. Okay, so first off, so we have had people want to get a CPD certificate for tonight and they are not a member of trauma care. Please do scan the QR code that's on your screen now. That will take you through to a type form that you can fill out where you can purchase your certificate for joining us tonight. So I'm just checking if that's a question or not that's come in. It's not. So we've only had one question come in so far, I think, because it was so informative and just so pertinent and just so full of information that people needed to hear. The one question that has come in is from someone who's asked, does the Domestic Abuse Act 2021 also apply in Scotland? There seems to be a similar Scotland Act, but it would be helpful to know if there are any differences.
In terms of the law, the Domestic Abuse Act is England and Wales, but there is a Domestic Abuse Act in Scotland, which again applies to all Scottish women and men. It's a really good act. In fact, some of it, especially around coercive controlling behaviour, was actually the English and Wales Act actually copied it, which so in many ways Scotland was ahead, but there is a separate act, but that same rules apply. It's as detailed and as comprehensive as the England and Wales Act. I mean, I think in Northern Ireland, because I think there's a colleague from Northern Ireland as well. Again, the Domestic Abuse Act 2021 doesn't apply in Northern Ireland, but there is an equivalent act. There's an equivalent act there. There's been a couple of questions about services for men in Northern Ireland as well.
Yeah, that was there was one on the list there as well, which it will pop up at the end as well. After these questions, just so people can see, and I'll make sure that after this as well, if you have any other resources or anything like, please feel free to send them across, and I'll get them all onto the videos that go online.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, just on the services for men in Wales and Northern Ireland, if you go onto our website, there's a directory of services, and it's got a location finder, or you can it's got a load of drop downs. So there's lots of services in Wales for male victims. I mentioned that they're funded by the local councils and the Welsh government for women, but they also are there for men. And in Northern Ireland, there's a particular group called the Men's Advisory Project, which operates out of Belfast, but across all of Northern Ireland. So again, there are services in Wales and Northern Ireland.
Amazing. So yeah, definitely go over to mankind.org if you need to find out more. Mark Wilson has asked, how do you overcome the bias in law enforcement?
Well, I mean, that is a challenge, especially because some of the training that the police actually get, especially new recruits get, is not inclusive enough. It's called DA Matters. I mean, I was speaking to a lady just last week at a university who'd just been through the training, and she said, it mentioned men once, but that was it. So we are worried about the bias in the training, but what we're starting to see is that the police are taking a firmer and a fairer view of male victims, partly because they're seeing, generally speaking, an increase in women who are violent. So they're basically thinking, well, actually, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that a woman could be carrying out either physical abuse or coercive controlling behaviour. And also a lot of these media activities and also organisations like ours have, had an impact in the police and how they view it. So 10 years ago, we were regularly getting guys calling our helpline up saying they've gone to the police, they've gone to the police with evidence, they've taken friends, family, they're not being believed, they're being, in some cases, laughed at. I'm not saying that doesn't always happen, but it's pretty rare now. And I go back to that Richard Spencer case, and also at Richard Spencer's case. As soon as the police saw had seen the evidence, they were straight in. They were straight in. So
Yeah.
there is still some bias in the enforcement, but it's kind of unconscious bias, but it's being reduced. We've just got to keep going, talking about domestic abuse in an inclusive way that it affects women and it affects men too. We've just got to keep going, but it's getting better.
I completely agree. Someone else has asked, what is happening with getting refuges for men?
Well, there's again a problem 10 years ago, and it was always about refugees because the technical term or the legal term is safe accommodation, and again in the Domestic Abuse Act, and I'm sure it is the same in Scotland and Northern Ireland, is that there is a responsibility for local authorities, local councils, to make sure that they have safe accommodation options for male and female victims. Because again, come back to the Equality Act, if you've got a male who is a victim of domestic abuse and is homeless or at risk because of the domestic abuse and he can't go back to the property, and a woman who is in the same position with the same level of risk and harm, then the local authority has to provide safe accommodation for that man as they would a woman. Because if the woman can get it and a man can't, then it's a breach of the Equality Act, as well as other acts. Again, I'm applying England and Wales here, Care Act, Homelessness Act, and a range of other, and Housing Act 96. So, but what we have seen has a recognition of that now really growing. So 10 years ago, there was very few safe accommodation options. So that includes refugees, that includes single units, which are single safe accommodation units, because refugees aren't always the answer. And safe accommodation with specialist accommodation just for men. What we're seeing now is that increasing rapidly for men. So at the minute across the whole of the UK, there's about 400 spaces which are available for men. About a third of those spaces are just for men, and the other 2/3 are available, could be for men or women. But there's been a huge increase especially in the last couple of years, in terms of safe accommodation options for men. Again, things are moving forward rapidly.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you. And a final question's come in. Have you or anyone else found anything particularly useful in persuading people to seek support?
I think in terms of particularly useful, it's about spotting the signs and those open-ended questions. Those, how are things going? How's your relationship? How are you feeling today? What's going on in your life, etc. Those open-ended questions from friends, family, and also from professional services, about spotting those signs that if a man's got injuries, they will make excuses initially, but you've got to keep going. But also around the kind of psychological abuse, anxiety, drinking, what is the actual triggers. And the thing is for men is that if you ask the questions, they may not disclose straight away, but eventually they will if you regularly, but not too much, ask those questions, because they will start to think, well, this is somebody who spotted something isn't going quite right in my life. And it's quite clear that they're not only concerned, but also they want to help. So the key thing is spotting those signs and asking those questions and being on hand to actually help them. Because what men want, they want to be acknowledged, They want to feel as though that there will be practical action, and they will want to feel that there's going to be that there's hope. So it's about action, hope, and acknowledgement, and that's what men want. And I think all of us have got a real opportunity to start to actually ask those types of questions and keep going.
Completely agree. And finally, I know I said finally before, but someone snuck in with another question. Someone's asked, will the safe accommodation for men also accept the children as well if they are with them?
Yeah, many of them do. There's a challenge for women and for men with in that respect. Also in terms of men and women who are disabled, for example. But a lot of the accommodation actually does. And again, there are legal requirements for the local authorities to actually be able to provide that accommodation where needed. And also, when men are in those accommodation, the councils again are legally obliged to provide them with some form of support. So they can't be just dumped somewhere and then not get any support. Some local authorities will quickly put a man or a woman in, say, a hotel, etc., just to get them out of the situation, but then they will be immediately assessed, and then further a safe accommodation will be available if it's needed.
Perfect. Thank you. And just finally for tonight, I am going to just quickly stop sharing my screen so I can get everything down and then go back to this. Perfect. And then we can go back to sharing the screen. I'll just get the links up for everyone as well again tonight so that people, just in case you missed it the first time round, you're able to get them now. But from everyone here at Trauma Care, everyone around the country and around the world, indeed, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Mark, we cannot thank you enough for tonight. It was enlightening. It was a fantastic webinar, and I hope it reaches many people once I get it online tomorrow as well. It was pertinent, it was needed, and it's a critical conversation that we should carry on having. As I mentioned before to everyone, help is available. If you've been affected by the content of tonight's webinar, please follow any of the links below. Everyone is available to help. And as Mark mentioned, on Mankind's website, there is a drop down with links through to different countries and different resources there as well. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need it. So wherever you are in the world, whatever you're doing tonight, please stay safe, take care of yourselves and of your loved ones. Mark, thank you so much again for joining us. It's been a wonderful webinar. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.